The morning my son got married, I sat alone in the parking lot of a church outside Charleston, gripping the steering wheel so hard my wedding invitation crumpled in my hands. I kept telling myself not to cry yet, not before I finally told the truth. At 61 years old, I thought I had already survived the worst pain life could offer. I survived bankruptcy, cancer, divorce, and the kind of loneliness that settles into your chest so deeply it changes the way you breathe, but nothing prepared me for hearing my own son call another man dad, while I stood 10 feet away pretending my heart wasn't breaking. My name is Margaret Collins, and for 18 years I kept a secret that nearly destroyed my family. That morning, the church smelled like lilies and expensive perfume. Guests laughed softly while photographers rushed around fixing ties and adjusting dresses. Everyone looked happy, except me. I sat in the bathroom staring at my reflection under harsh yellow lights, my silver hair barely curled anymore after chemo, and the wrinkles around my mouth had deepened from years of stress and overtime shifts. My son Ryan once told me those wrinkles made me look safe. I held on to that memory while reaching into my purse and touching the folded envelope hidden inside. Inside that envelope were bank records, DNA results, and one signed confession. I had carried those papers for almost a year. Sometimes they felt heavier than concrete. I grew up in rural Kentucky, where people worked hard and minded their business. My father repaired farm equipment, and my mother cleaned motel rooms until arthritis bent her fingers sideways. We didn't have much, but we survived. At 22, I married my high school sweetheart, Thomas. He was charming, funny, and the kind of man who could walk into a room and make strangers trust him instantly. For a while, life felt simple. Then Ryan was born, and everything changed. Thomas started traveling constantly for work. At least that was his excuse. Some weeks he disappeared for days. Bills piled up. I worked double shifts at a nursing home, while raising Ryan almost entirely alone. Still, I stayed, because when you grow up poor, stability feels more important than happiness. One winter night, when Ryan was 8 years old, Thomas left and never came back. No warning, no goodbye, just an empty closet and unpaid credit cards. 3 months later, I learned the truth. He had another family in Atlanta, another wife, another child. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor holding those divorce papers while Ryan slept in the next room, completely unaware his entire life had shattered overnight. From that moment on, it was just me and him. I became everything at once: mother, father, provider, protector. I missed meals so Ryan could eat better. I worked holidays, overnight shifts, weekends. I once slept in my car during a snowstorm because I couldn't afford enough gas to drive home between shifts. And somehow, Ryan still grew into a good man. He was kind, smart, funny, the kind of kid who thanked waitresses and called his grandmother every Sunday. By the time he became a corporate lawyer in Chicago, I felt proud enough to burst. Then he met Vanessa. Beautiful, confident, wealthy, the kind of woman who had never checked her bank account before grocery shopping. But she loved him deeply, and that was enough for me. The first time I met her parents was during their engagement dinner at a private country club overlooking Lake Michigan. I remember feeling underdressed the second I walked inside. Crystal chandeliers, piano music, men wearing watches worth more than my car. Then Vanessa's father stood up from the table smiling warmly toward me, and my entire body went cold. His name was Richard Hale, the same Richard Hale who had been my husband Thomas's business partner 25 years earlier. The same Richard Hale who helped Thomas disappear. The same Richard Hale who knew my husband abandoned us while secretly stealing money from our joint accounts. He recognized me immediately. I saw it happen in his eyes. That tiny flicker of panic before he forced another smile onto his face. But he said nothing. And somehow neither did I, because Ryan looked happy. Happier than I had ever seen him. So I swallowed the truth and smiled through dinner, while my hands shook under the tablecloth. On the drive home, I had to pull over twice because I couldn't stop crying. That night, I reopened every wound I spent 2 decades trying to bury. And for the first time in years, I hired a private investigator. For 11 months, I lived a double life. To my son, I was the excited mother helping plan centerpieces and tasting wedding cakes. But behind closed doors, I was digging through the ruins of my past. The investigator uncovered things I wish I had never learned. Thomas hadn't just abandoned us, he stole nearly $240,000 before disappearing, retirement savings, loans, insurance money, everything, and Richard Hale helped hide it. There were shell companies, fake transfers, forged signatures. I spent nights sitting at my kitchen table staring at documents until sunrise, while old rage crawled back into my chest like something alive. The worst part, Thomas was still alive, living in Arizona under a different last name, retired comfortably. Meanwhile, I spent 20 years breaking my body in nursing homes just to survive. I almost told Ryan 100 times, but every time I tried, I stopped myself because I knew what it would do to him. No child wants to discover his entire life was built on lies right before his wedding, so I waited, maybe too long. The wedding venue sat beside a lake surrounded by tall pine trees and white lanterns hanging from wooden beams. It looked like something from a movie. Ryan looked nervous before the ceremony. I remember fixing his tie while he smiled at me softly. Then he said something that nearly broke me. "You're the reason I became the man I am." I had to turn away so he wouldn't see my eyes filling with tears. For a few hours, I convinced myself maybe I could stay silent forever. Maybe protecting him mattered more than revenge. Then the reception started, and Richard Hale ruined everything himself. Halfway through dinner, he stood holding a champagne glass while guests applauded politely. He told stories about business success, family legacy, and the importance of strong fathers. Then he laughed and looked directly at me, and he said, "Ryan's lucky Vanessa's family could finally give him the opportunities he never had growing up." The room went silent, not completely silent, just that uncomfortable rich people silence where everyone pretends nothing bad happened while secretly waiting for drama. I looked at Ryan. His smile disappeared instantly. Then I looked at Richard, and after 18 years of silence, something inside me snapped. I stood slowly and reached beneath my chair for the envelope I had hidden there before dinner. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Strangely, I felt calm. I asked for the microphone. At first, people thought I was giving an emotional mother of the groom speech. I almost wish that had been true. Instead, I looked directly at Richard Hale and said, "Ooh, you're right. Ryan didn't have many opportunities growing up." The room became perfectly still. I told them how my husband disappeared when Ryan was 8, how he emptied our accounts before leaving, how another man helped him cover everything up. Then I pulled out the documents one by one. Bank transfers, signatures, photos. Finally, a recent confession from Thomas himself. The entire room exploded into whispers. Vanessa covered her mouth in shock. Ryan looked frozen. And Richard Hale, for the first time since I met him, he looked afraid. Then someone behind me suddenly shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I turned around. And standing near the dance floor was Thomas, my ex-husband, the man who vanished 25 years earlier at his own son's wedding. The DJ quietly turned off the music. Outside, thunder rolled across the lake while rain started hitting the windows, and right there in the middle of his own wedding reception, my son walked away from both fathers at the same time. He came straight toward me instead. I'll never forget what he said next. "You stayed." That was it. 2 words. "You stayed." Then he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and after holding myself together for almost 2 decades, I finally broke. Not because of revenge, not because I won, but because for the first time in my life, I realized something important. Children remember who stayed, not who disappeared, not who had money, not who looked successful in photographs. They remember who sat beside hospital beds, who packed lunches, who answered late-night phone calls, who stayed. The storm outside got worse, so guests slowly began leaving early. The wedding was basically over. But something unexpected happened before the night ended. Vanessa walked over, took Ryan's hand, and said, "We start our family differently." Simple, quiet, but powerful. A few months later, Ryan and Vanessa visited my house for Thanksgiving. While setting plates on the table, Ryan suddenly handed me a tiny wrapped box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with 4 words, "The parent who stayed." I cried so hard Vanessa started crying too. Now, whenever people ask me if exposing the truth at the wedding was worth it, I tell them this: the truth destroys some families, but sometimes it saves the right ones.